Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into something a lot of folks find, well, a little snooze-worthy. We're tackling low voter turnout today.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't exactly scream excitement, does it?
Not really.
Yeah,
But here's the catch. This isn't just about elections, okay? It's about this domino effect that hits everything.
everything.
Yeah. How our governments work, what policies they focus on, even the future of democracy itself.
Huh, okay, I'm listening.
We've got a podcast episode laying out some pretty wild scenarios, interviews with political science experts who know their stuff, and stories from people working to get everyone more involved in the process.
So like a blend of theory and real-world stuff.
Exactly. It's fascinating because we usually get hung up on the HOW of voting, registering, finding your polling
Well,
place.
logistics.
But we rarely stop and think about what happens when tons of people just don't.
It's like ignoring a tiny crack in a bridge. Seems small, but
But could lead to a huge collapse, right?
exact.
Let's jump into a scenario from the Democracy in Action podcast that really got me thinking. Imagine an election where 60% of eligible voters just don't show up.
Wow, okay.
That means the winner, whoever they are, is chosen by just over 20% of the electorate. So does that feel truly representative? I mean, would you feel good about a government elected by such a tiny slice of the population?
It really highlights how low turnout weakens this idea of consent of the governed.
Consent of the governed sounds kind of formal.
It's a simple idea, though. Democracies are built on the idea that the government's power comes from the people, right?
Right.
But when a huge chunk of folks aren't participating, that whole foundation gets shaky. And if we're talking numbers, just look at the 2022 midterms, only 47% of eligible voters actually voted.
Less than half. Seriously.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And it creates the situation where certain groups, often older folks, wealthier individuals, they tend to vote more consistently, so they end up having way more influence on policy.
So the people who are already more likely to vote get even more power.
Exactly. And the needs of those who don't vote,
Well, they get pushed aside.
exactly. And that's where democratic erosion comes into play. Now, this isn't some dramatic overnight collapse of democracy, all right?
Okay, so not like a sudden implosion.
No, it's more like a gradual weakening over time, a slow decline.
Death by a thousand cuts.
Yeah, something like that. Professor Elena Rossi, an expert on democratic theory, she explains this really well in one of the interviews. She says, as participation goes down, we see these warning signs. A weaker judiciary, the press facing restrictions, less transparency from the government.
Subtle, but dangerous.
Exactly.
Like those sci-fi movies where society slowly turns into a dystopia, but nobody notices until it's too late.
Well, maybe not that dramatic, but you get the idea. The point is, democratic erosion often starts with apathy and disengagement.
And low voter turnout is a prime example of that.
Right.
Which brings us to a powerful story from Marcus Nguyen, a civic engagement advocate we heard from. He works in communities where turnout is consistently low, and he talks about how this lack of participation directly translates into a lack of investment.
Investment like
Basic stuff. Schools, transportation, healthcare.
essential services.
Yeah. And he paints this really vivid picture of how it creates this vicious cycle.
So.
When people don't vote, their needs get overlooked, which then makes them feel even more disconnected from the system.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
The less you participate, the less you matter in the eyes of those making decisions. It makes you think, if so many people feel like their vote doesn't count, why bother?
Yeah, like they're being told they don't matter.
Exactly.
And that's the scary part, right? When people feel like their voices don't matter, they're less likely to hold those in power accountable.
So it's not just about missing out on, like, I don't know, a skate park or something.
No, not at all.
It's about those in charge thinking they can get away with stuff they wouldn't if everyone was paying attention and voting.
Exactly. Low turnout, it creates this breeding ground for policies that favor a small group.
While ignoring everyone else.
Yeah, and it's like this slow erosion of what democracy is all about. Fairness, representation, being accountable.
Okay, so not a great picture. But there has to be something we can do about this. We're not just going to sit around and watch democracy fall apart.
Right. And the good news is that there are solutions. We just have to be, proactive and change how we think about voting.
So it's not just showing up on election day. It's bigger than that.
Way bigger. It's about how we see ourselves as citizens. One of the experts they interviewed, Dr. David Chen, he's a political scientist, he argued that we need to go beyond just making voting easier.
Which is important, but...
Totally. But he says we need to get people to believe in the power of their vote again.
Okay, I get that. But how do we do that? when so many people are just disillusioned with the whole system?
Dr. Chen suggested a bunch of things. First, we got to address the systemic barriers that make it harder for certain communities to vote.
Things like voter ID laws, not enough polling places, voting only on weekdays when people work.
All those obstacles that make it feel like the system is designed to keep certain people from voting.
Exactly.
Then we got to focus on civic education.
Like, back to basics?
We have to do a better job of explaining how the government works, how policies are made, how individual votes shape things.
Connect the dots for people.
Show them voting isn't some chore, it's how you influence stuff that directly affects you.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just some abstract, be a good citizen thing.
No. And this is where Marcus Nguyen's work comes in. Remember him. He's out there, boots on the ground, working with communities to get people voting.
Right, the civic engagement advocate,
And he talks about the importance of meeting people where they are.
not just lecturing at them.
Right, having real conversations, showing them their voice actually matters.
Building trust, making people feel seen and heard.
Exactly. And it's also about highlighting the real impact of elections. Like, forget the abstract democracy stuff for a minute.
Make it real.
Yeah, show people how decisions made in those elections directly affect their lives.
Like what kind of stuff?
Think about local school board elections.
Okay, yeah.
Those decisions directly impact the quality of education our kids get. Or city council races, they determine how neighborhoods are developed, what services they get.
Wow, yeah, when you put it like that,
It hits home, right?
it's not some far-off political thing anymore. It's your life, your community.
Exactly. And that's why we have to rethink how we see voting. It's not just picking a candidate. It's about shaping the world we want to live in.
Holding those in power accountable. Making our voices heard.
You got it.
Wow, I'm really seeing why this deep dive is so important. This isn't just about filling in a bubble on a ballot. It's about the core of our society and our responsibility to shape its future.
Yeah.
So it's not enough to fix the system, right? We have to reignite that passion for being engaged citizens.
Yeah.
But how do we actually DO that? It seems like everywhere you turn, there's someone saying, vote. It's important. But the numbers stay low.
Right. Those typical get out the vote campaigns, they don't always cut it.
So what does work?
The research suggests we need to hit something deeper. Like, people need a sense of purpose.
Okay, so not just vote, but your vote matters.
Exactly. A belief that what we do together can actually change things.
So how do we convince people of that?
One way is to show real-world examples of how getting involved has made a difference. Remember that story from the podcast about that community trying to save their library?
The one where they got the city council to change their minds about the budget cuts.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
It shows how people coming together can achieve something real.
And those kinds of stories can be really inspiring, right?
Absolutely. When people see that their participation can lead to actual change, they're way more likely to get involved.
So we need to show them that they can shape their communities, not just sit back and watch things happen.
Right. And it's about that sense of community, shared responsibility. When we're connected to something bigger than ourselves, we want to participate.
So it's not just individual action, it's like a movement.
Yeah, like a collective push for something better. And that's where organizations like the one Marcus works with come in.
The civic engagement guy.
They're doing amazing work, connecting people, building trust, empowering communities to take charge.
It's really cool to hear about folks like him dedicating their lives to strengthening democracy. Gives me hope.
Me too. And remember, change starts with us, with each one of us.
So we're not powerless.
Not at all. By having these discussions, sharing inspiring stories, encouraging people to participate, that's how we build a stronger, more responsive democracy.
So to wrap things up, we hope this deep dive into low voter turnout has given you a new perspective. It's not just about numbers, it's about power, representation, the very future of democracy. And remember, your voice matters. Your vote matters. Don't underestimate the power you have to make a difference.